Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the special business meeting for the District of Squamish for Tuesday, November 24th. Hatsqualin, Queetsalutmuk, Latskohomish, Oameo. As always, we're meeting today on the traditional territory of the Squamish Nation. Motion to adopt the special agenda. Moved by Councillor French, seconded by Councillor Stoner. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. We have to approve Ministerial Order M192, and that the district is ensuring openness, transparency, accessibility, and accountability at this meeting by the following means. This meeting is being live streamed, and a video of this meeting will be available on the district's website for viewing on an on-demand basis. Motion to approve that. Moved by Councillor French, seconded by Councillor Anderson. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. So we don't have a lengthy agenda, but certainly an interesting agenda. And we're turning it over to our finance team, our Chief Financial Officer, and our Acting Manager of Financial Planning to walk us through the quarterly financial variance report for Q3. Over to you, Ms. Boxrud and Mr. Russell.
Good morning, Mayor and Council. I will actually just turn it over to Roland Russell, our Senior Financial Analyst of Financial Planning and Reporting, to deliver the Q3 financial report. Over to you, Roland.
Okay. Can you see a slide presentation?
Not yet.
Okay, because it says that I am sharing my screen, but obviously I have not yet. Content. Is that any better?
No, there's no presentation yet.
Okay.
There we go.
Yeah, thank you. Good morning, Mayor and Council. My name is Roland Russell, Senior Financial Analyst for the District of Squamish. And if you'll bear with me for, I'm sorry. I think that's supposed to be me and presenter view. Hi, we're going to talk today about our Q3 financial results. And on our agenda today, we're going to outline the report and the objectives. We're going to talk about the 2020 COVID-19 financial impact. We're going to look at the results of the Q3 financial report, and we are going to have time for a discussion of discussion and questions, I guess is what I'm trying to say there. My apologies. So we've made a few changes in our presentation and what we've included in the financial report, one of which is we've included the manager's initials. This allows our managers to be identified with specific projects that they are related to or they are managing. That way council can direct our questions as appropriately. We've also included the shading that we had used in the budget presentations for climate change adaptation and climate change mitigation. It's kind of a yellow and a bit of a light salmon. And we've added handy reference numbers, hoping that those make it easier for everyone to follow the report. With respect to COVID-19, what we would like to indicate is this: is we were very happy with our tax collection results. So even though there was an extension of the time frame to pay taxes, and there was some concern earlier in the year that there might be a greater number of people that were missing the tax deadlines, we actually have reached 96% collection on our tax revenue, which is comparable to most years. So that's the good news. On the slightly less good news is the revenue losses anticipated in Parks and Recreation are growing and have grown over the third quarter. And that does make sense because a number of facilities were closed over the summer and we're not able to fully ramp back up. Transit also saw lower ridership extend from Q2 into Q3. Our emergency fund, with respect to, or emergency response fund, I should say, with respect to COVID, has more or less completed its spending for the year. And we have submitted our financial claims to the province. The province has approved $78,000 of the approximate $95,000 that we've spent this year. The really good news on an overall basis that occurred in the third quarter, although I guess the actual announcement date was slightly after the end of the third quarter, was that the BC government has provided a COVID restart grant, and that grant will be available to offset COVID-related costs that have taken place in 2020. So most of these variances that we speak about today will be offset by this grant from the province. So we're rather appreciative of that. With respect to the specific operating results for Q3, and at this point I should note that in your reports there is an error in that when you're looking at the graphs that come after the Q3 operating results, they were inadvertently identified as Q2. Those graphs actually refer to Q3, and the numbers associated in there are for the third quarter. It was an oversight on our behalf that the title was not changed. So with respect to those in the general fund, with the noted exceptions of items related to COVID-19, we're trending on budget, both revenues and expenses. There are a couple areas where we're seeing some exceptions. Those being building inspection revenue is down slightly, and we're also seeing lower interest on borrowings, and that's related to the timing of borrowings and when the interest is processed. With respect to the utility funds, the diversion of recycling at the landfill is lower, and that is impacting both the revenues and the expenses. And we're also seeing savings in biosolids with waste management, wastewater, my apologies. And that is related to a change in operations to bring a service in-house rather than contracted. So we're seeing some savings there on the expense side. With respect to the projects, the special operating projects, vast majority, 54, are in progress. I said we're pretty happy with that. It's a jump from where we were at the end of Q2. And also, we would like to state that at this point, there are 10 projects that have been completed. And as we progress through the year, obviously the number of completed projects is going to increase. So we're making good progress towards our goals, and we're happy about that. Some of the project highlights that I'd like to speak about rather quickly are the environmental stewardship. Our climate change action plan is well underway. We are running into some risk with respect to the estuary environmental condition plan. We anticipate that project may not go forward this year. Under emergency management, the Fire Smart community resilience work has been delayed until 2021, but we did receive the grant in 2020 and we'll be able to spend that in 2021. And for engineering, one of the larger projects that they have undertaken this year, the Eagle Viewing Area Dike Master Plan project has been completed under budget. With respect to the capital projects, there's some really good news in that of the 84 projects, 29, I was about to say percent, that's not quite correct. 29 have been completed. And one of the reasons we see a significant jump in completed projects between Q2 and Q3 was in the area of fleet management, they were able to purchase a number of vehicles and other machinery and equipment, which allowed us to complete a number of projects. 40 projects are in progress, so approximately half of the overall projects are in progress, and a dozen projects have been canceled or delayed. With respect to some of the larger projects, I'll make some very quick comments here. The Valley Cliff Fire Hall, the temporary fire hall is up. I'm sure if anyone's gone along Clark Drive, they've seen it. And it is nearing completion. I have seen some fire trucks certainly around the area, although I'm not sure if they're using the facility currently. The Park Sea Dike, and I apologize to our First Nations people if I can't pronounce that word. I'm not going to try to do it in public. Is at the design stage. The Jimmy Slough Dike has completed detailed design and will commence construction in 2021. And our annual rehab projects are well underway, and most of them are trending on budget or slightly below. So those are the highlights of the capital projects and the operating projects. And at this point, I will stop and I will open the floor to council for questions with respect to projects.
Thank you, Mr. Russell.
Thank you. And I think that I will and stop sharing my screen at this point.
Great. All right, council, any questions? Councilor Race and then Councilor Anderson and then Stoner.
Thank you. And this isn't with respect to a project. It's the operating report. Is this the time for that, or is there another for the presentation?
No, this would be the time for that.
Okay. I'm looking at the page that's actually 6 of 30 in our report, but it's the revenue and expenses for utilities, water services and wastewater services in particular. And in both cases, those numbers have exceeded, and these are revenues, so it's not a bad thing, I suppose. They've exceeded the total 2020 budget after 3/4 of the year. And I'm just wondering if there's a particular reason for that.
Through the chair, yes, there is. We collect our utility revenues in July with our taxes. So as such, if our revenues are higher than we budgeted, then they would be above 100% of our budget. And in this year, for both water and wastewater, we have seen a growth in customers that was larger than we had anticipated. We do anticipate an annual growth in customers. And this year, the number of customers was higher than we anticipated. Therefore, our revenue was higher than we had budgeted. And because we book our revenue for the utilities in July, the same time that we bill taxes, we're above 100%.
Oh, and just to follow up, thank you for that. I was wondering, though, with respect to water, are we collecting revenue from metering at this time? Because I remember a presentation where there was going to be a certain trial and error period when we started charging by metering, where we had to sort of adjust the metered rates to make sure we were just covering costs and not extracting more than necessary. But is that factored into it at all?
We are recovering costs from some customers who have meters based on metered rates. But to be fair, the vast majority of our metering that we are intending has not been completed. I won't say the vast majority, but the majority of the metering has not been completed. And until the metering is more widespread for the institutional, commercial, and industrial sector, we're not going to be revising the rates for those areas and charging them using the metered rate standard. So at this point in time, that adjustment for metered rates is not as pronounced. That'll probably be in 2022. We anticipate that there'll be a rate review in 2021 once the meter is complete, and then in 2022 we'll be presenting a more holistic picture of what the water rates would need to look like for our metered customers.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Anderson?
Yes, just a small note. One of the projects cited as being at risk was referred to as an estuary environmental condition plan. And it's just, I assume that this may refer or relate to the estuary management plan. We should be clear that it's an integrated resource management plan. It concerns transportation, recreation, fisheries, and traditional uses, as well as industry. So it's just it may be a little bit of a misnomer to refer to it as an estuary environmental condition report. It is an integrated resource management plan fundamentally. This is just a footnote. Thank you.
I just want to check with staff. Is that a true assumption, or is this a different project than what Councillor Anderson is imagining?
I'm going to put that to our engineering group for response, please.
Our CAO is going to answer this.
Thank you, Mayor Elliott. I would like to defer to engineering. However, if no one is on the line right now, then that's something that we can certainly follow up with and provide clarity to council.
Thank you. Councillor Stoner.
Thank you. Through the chair, I want to carry on with some questions about the financial plan operating report, so page 6 of 30 in our package. Can staff just clarify, so for both 2019 and 2020, we're showing substantial surpluses, but that includes the amounts that get allocated to reserves, correct?
Yes, that is correct. Through the chair.
Thank you. And then in terms of special projects, reference line number 7 is the community carbon marketplace. But I believe we heard from staff a few weeks ago that that project was actually being put on hold, but it's showing as complete over 200% of its budget amount. So I'm just curious where that's actually sitting.
Is there, we're missing some people that could answer that question, maybe.
Yeah, I realize we might not have the right folks on the call to answer that one.
Again, council, apologies, but I'll find some clarity on that.
Oh, thank you. That was it for me.
Councillor Pettengill?
Yeah, thank you. And I apologize if this was already explained, but on page 6 again, the 2020 year-to-date actual reflects the first 3 quarters of 2020. I want to confirm the 2019 year-to-date actual is all 4 quarters of 2019?
No, actually, let me look at these 2 sets of numbers. The 2019 year-to-date actual would also be for the first 3 quarters of 2019. So the actuals are comparative and they are for year-to-date, in this case, September 30th, and the budget is for the total year.
Okay, follow up then if I may. So it seems then, and I guess Councillor Race kind of already asked about this, but in both years, our first 3 quarters seem to put us a fair bit above our budget on revenues. Is that typical?
Sorry?
Sorry, Mr. Russell, I was just going to say that I believe finance staff always estimates growth conservatively rather than underestimate, so that we can have higher revenues than we anticipate because we estimate our growth rate in a more conservative way. But Mr. Russell, you may have a different answer.
I would like to thank you, Mayor Elliott, because we do. We try to be as accurate as possible, but we would prefer to err on the side of caution and therefore have our revenues exceed projections rather than the other way around. You will note that primarily the reason that we are above is because the majority of our revenues come through at the same time in July with taxes. The other aspect that is that should be noted is that if we are ahead on some of our other areas, and I would say specifically things like economic development and economic and community development, then that will often push us over budget. And that is because there are some areas in there related to both hotel tax and CAC contributions that historically we do not budget, or budget a very low number because they're very hard to estimate. And they're also a revenue flow through. So as revenues increase, the transfer to reserves also increases. And so there are those instances where we have flow throughs, and as a result of the flow through, we will exceed budget if our revenues are significant. In 2020, due to COVID, for example, the revenues with respect to economic development for hotel tax were much lower than normal. But in 2019, for example, the hotel tax revenue would flow through economic development, and we would not budget a large amount for that because it's very difficult for us to try to ascertain what level that would be. And because it goes in one side on the revenue side, comes out on the expense side, that would put our revenues above budget on a regular basis, and that doesn't occur.
So if I can just clarify then, it sounds like the majority of our revenues comes in the first 3 quarters, and we would expect very little additional revenue in the last quarter, and that's kind of typical.
That is typical. I think it's fair. That's typical.
Thank you.
Just going to go over to the CAO, just take here the microphone.
Thank you, Mayor Elliott. Mr. Wickham is now on the line and can answer the previous questions about the estuary and the carbon marketplace.
Thanks for joining us, Mr. Wickham. We have a couple of questions. So I'll go to Councillor Anderson first. He had a question about the estuary project that is been delayed. Go ahead, Councillor Anderson, if you'd like to ask your question.
Thank you. I'll just repeat it for the benefit of Mr. Wickham. I'm not aware of an environmental condition, an estuary and environmental condition project. I am aware, or we all are, of the need to, or an ongoing review or prospect to review the estuary management plan. Now, this particular project was highlighted in Mr. Russell's report as an estuary environmental condition plan. And my question or point really was that we should be mindful that it is, the estuary management plan is an integrated resource management plan that addresses recreation, transportation, and other sectors, as well as environmental conservation.
Yes, through the chair. Thank you for the comment / clarification. I'd like to, first of all, there was a typographic error in the presentation. It's not a condition plan assessment. It's actually a coordination plan. This particular project was put on the budget last year, very much at the last minute, actually, in order to support the very large coordinated project around the spit and the training berm in the wildlife management area, which is run by the Watershed Society and DFO in partnership with Squamish Nation. During the year, sometime in the spring, the project decided to change gears, and instead of doing a significant realignment of the spit itself, to install a new culvert, a new box culvert, an additional one over the one that was installed last year. That project is now complete. And there was a lot less community engagement and involvement and everything required for that smaller scope of project. And so we have basically delayed this. The main reason we decided to delay this overall plan and project until we understand sort of the intent of the project proponents and can look towards the future. There's a separate plan, or sorry, a separate project that I believe is in the 2021 budget with a similar title. It gets very confusing. To look at working on the revamping the sort of the management structure, let's call it, of the overall estuary area, and to expand the membership and to create a new management structure to replace SEMC, which at this point can't really continue under its past mandate because of the changing mandates at senior levels of government. So that is in the budget for 2021.
Thank you, Mr. Wickham. So there are two distinct projects. That's very helpful.
Correct.
Thank you. And then Councillor Stoner had a question about the community carbon marketplace.
So in our package, Mr. Wickham, line 7 is the community carbon marketplace phase 4, which says is currently in progress and about double in its budget out of spend. And I'm just curious, I feel like a few weeks ago we heard from yourself and Mr. Pickett that this project was actually being put on hold and revisited in terms of its efficacy. And so I'm just curious where that project sits.
Yes, line 7. Sorry, I found the line. I don't know how to answer that other than there appears to be an error in that. We've probably put some costs against the wrong line. I think probably what's happened there, if I'm just looking at those amounts, is we purchase our carbon offsets from our local community carbon marketplace for our CARET reporting and to net out at net zero emissions. So probably what's happened there, that value there is probably the purchase of our offsets as opposed to the separate project, which was to review the carbon marketplace and just ensure that it's still effective, that it's still the direction that we should be going, which we did take the conscious decision this year that we had a lot of other things going on for standing up the climate action plan and the sustainability group increases, and so we decided to put that project off to next year. So I think that's basically an error on coding there.
Thank you. All right. Any other questions? I have a general question, Ms. Boxrud, about how this grant from the province will show up in our accounting to sort of reconcile this year. So we're showing our revenue losses from recreation, from transit, all those sorts of things. So what will this look like when we reconcile the whole year? Is there a line item that will make us whole somehow by applying this grant?
Through the chair, yes, that's exactly it. So what we're in the process of doing is collecting all the costs and revenue losses. We'll be bringing them over to a separate sub-project. I won't get into details of UBW, but it'll bring it over into a separate area, which will have a revenue that's brought in from the grant to offset it. So we'll have a net neutral. So all of the revenues will be recouped and all the expenses will be recouped as well.
Okay, and so going forward into 2021, that line item will remain there. We'll have, as we use the grant up, it will be the same process. We'll have a revenue and then an offset, and they match.
That's exactly correct.
Okay. All right. Any other questions or comments on the variance report? Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Russell. Thank you, Mr. Wickham, for dropping in to answer our questions. Next up is the review of our budget survey feedback. Oh, sorry, I have a motion that we receive the Q3 2020 quarterly financial variance report for information. Moved by Councillor Ray, seconded by Councillor Herford. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Mr. Russell, I'm sure you've noted where those errors might be, and we can clarify those for Q4.
Yes, I have.
Thank you. All right. So we're moving over to Christina Moore to talk about our budget survey feedback. Welcome.
Good morning, Council. I'm Christina Moore, Communications Manager for the District of Squamish. Hello. I believe there is a presentation that will be loaded momentarily.
Great.
Okay, thank you for your patience. Good morning. I'm here to talk this morning about the survey results that we have just recently compiled from the budget survey. We ran a high-level survey to poll the community and just get some high-level feedback on their priorities, check in with them. We generally do that at this time of year around the start of the budget process. And this was really about checking in and understanding their priorities as it relates to the entire 5-year financial plan. But of course, top of mind for everyone is the coming year. We do, I think it's important to note as well, this survey ran from October 30th to November 15th, and midway through that, we did have a change in provincial health guidelines. So that is to be taken into consideration. Some of the responses pre-guidelines and post-guidelines may reflect a change in the health orders and in the experiences that our residents are facing on a day-to-day basis and a changing basis in response to the pandemic. So we received 251 completed responses, and I will take you through the results. Now, there are quite a number of slides. I know that many of the much of the data, many of the responses to the questions were shared with you on the agenda on Thursday. And the new information that wasn't added to the agenda is based on 5 open-ended questions that we did ask through the survey. The comments were very varied in those responses to the questions. And so we've worked to group them in as best a way we can so that Council can extrapolate some of the themes from those questions. Following this presentation, I will share with you by email and via our website for the public. I will share the full document of all the comments. So even though we're presenting a high-level look at the themes today, there is an opportunity to look at every single comment that was received, and that will be in your inbox and for the public at squamish.ca/budget shortly after this presentation. So let's get started here. The first question was a similar question that we asked of the community last year, and it was looking at the council strategic plan pillars. The 4 pillars were asked to be ranked as it related to the importance for the public. And the lower the score in the average rank suggests or indicates that that particular pillar received more first or second rankings. So in this round of fall 2020, economy and local jobs came up on top as the most important pillar ranked for the community. But as you can see, there's a fairly tight race, I guess, between all 4 pillars. They generally received a fairly similar score. And feel free, I can answer questions as we go along to the best of my ability. This is really just data. There's no analysis here, but I can answer questions along the way, or we can get through the slides and have a discussion at the end. So
Just have a discussion at the end, Ms. Moore.
Great. Okay, so the second question asked from a long list, asked the community to prioritize the operational areas that really rose to the top for them. I have shown the top 10 here that rose to the top, with active transportation being the number 1. A minute to look through that. The third question gave the community an opportunity to weigh in on advocacy efforts that council should make on behalf of the community to the provincial or federal governments, mostly provincial in this case. And we provided a list and asked this list here and asked them to rank the importance to council, or sorry, to the citizens for council to advocate on their behalf. And in addition to this list, we did provide an open-ended question that allowed for the community to weigh in on other topics that were not included on the list, but they felt were important and that they would prioritize for council to advocate on their behalf. And the most received mentions, again, this is one of the open-ended questions, so the responses were varied, but the most received mentions were themed around these 5 topics in this order. We took the opportunity through this survey to ask some questions around the COVID response from the district's point of view. And the following questions provide some data on where the community feels that we should be directing our efforts. This one, encourage physical distancing through signage and advertising. We did quite a bit of this at the outset in March and April, and over the summer we had neighborhood signs. We ran ads in newspapers. We have continued to focus our social media efforts around promoting the provincial guidelines, the provincial health orders and guidelines to ensure that the community is well informed of the current health guidelines. And the majority of the people here seem to think that we should continue on the same path. So looking at this question, providing COVID-friendly recreation program offerings, for example, in smaller groups and outdoor covered spaces. With this, we really wanted to get a sense of whether people were comfortable with the efforts that were underway within the guidelines, or whether they felt that we should be doing more. And this is the response we received. We asked the community whether we should focus on encouraging visitors to travel to Squamish, of course, for economic development and the recovery of the tourism industry and our downtown businesses and our retail and service industries across the community. And this was the response to that question. And whether we should be providing additional in-person public engagement opportunities within parameters of public health safety guidelines, or if people felt that we were offering a sufficient amount within the restrictions that are imposed upon us at the moment. And whether we should plan for and invest in covered outdoor areas to help support neighborhood connectivity and public space activation during the pandemic and presumably beyond. Whether we should help promote buy local campaigns more so than we currently do. Do you know that we do work closely with the Chamber of Commerce and Tourism Squamish with our economic development departments to help support this currently. This question arose from a pilot project that's taking place in Alberta to look at rapid testing at air and land borders that would help support the recovery of the tourism sector. And the majority of people, almost 60%, feel that we should advocate for this. And then an open-ended question was, what else should we be doing during the pandemic? Again, the responses were varied. These are the top 5 responses as they were grouped and themed together. I think we can check number 1 off our list. So moving back to the budget, we asked 2 questions. The first being, in 2021, where would the community like to see an increase in funding? And then the next question is, we asked the reverse, in order to afford increases, where would the community request to decrease funding? So this first one looks at increased funding. This was a again, very varied responses across the board. And then areas to decrease funding, the most received mentions included the following. We took the opportunity to find out a little bit about where residents currently receive their information, or most often receive their information, to help us guide our communications efforts and outreach. And we also asked what residents want to hear more about, in addition to what we currently share and what we're able to convey to the community. And at the end of the survey, we did look a little bit at demographics. We asked gender and age, with the majority of respondents being female between the ages of 40 to 54. And the area of town where the respondents lived. And that's a quick look at the results. Happy to go back to any of the slides and for further discussion. But I will just add a reminder that even though the survey is closed, community input continues to be welcome throughout the budget process. So residents can send their emails to budgetfeedback@squamish.ca, and we continue to provide all of the documents and presentations at squamish.ca/budget as the budget process continues. And that is it for my presentation of the slides. And over to council for discussion, questions. We can head back to any of the responses if you wish.
Great, thank you. Questions, comments, Councillor Herford?
Thank you. The engagement slide that said that the conclusion was keep doing what we're doing. It kind of struck me that we're reaching out. This has been answered by people that we have connected with the technology. So versus the people that we haven't been able to connect with. And I'm just curious how the responses, the quantity of responses compared to in years past when we've been able to use more traditional methods.
Thank you for that question. Through the mayor, yes. So the survey was advertised through the chief newspaper as well as through our social media channels and our website. But you are right. The drawback of the survey this year was that it was primarily online and that we didn't have the in-person interactions. This actually was a pretty good response this year. Last year, we had about 150, so we had slightly less responses to the survey. So even though we were not, we were not in person, the survey results this year were not terribly off track with previous years.
One more if I could. Thank you. That's reassuring that we're getting some more input actually through this this system. In some of the slides where you showed the demographics of who was engaged, including the area of town where they reside, have we looked at that in comparison to the average of the community? Like, does that roughly represent the population distribution? You know what I mean? I'm just curious if we're reaching more, if we're getting a higher level of engagement from various neighborhoods, and if there's any lessons that we can learn from that, or from certain age demographics.
I think that's a great question, and we have not looked at that data and comparison in terms of where the population, the percentage of population within each neighborhood and how this compares. It's certainly something we could look at and perhaps set a benchmark for future presentation or future surveys as well.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yep, go ahead, Councillor Stoner.
Thank you. Through the chair, Ms. Moore, I was wondering if you by any chance remember what the ranks were of the 4 pillars in last year's survey. I know they're all quite close, but.
Yes, I do. Through the chair, the first item, ranked number 1 last year, was the planet and our environment. Economy and local jobs was number 2. Housing affordability and diversity was number 3. And neighborhood connectivity and public spaces was number 4 last year. I think the difference, this year we saw a very close, I'll pop back to that slide here for a second. We saw a very close difference, a very tiny difference between all of the 4 ranks. Last year, the planet and the environment was quite significantly in front of the other 3. and then the remaining 3 were very, very closely tied together. So a little bit of a shift this year, perhaps due to the economic circumstances we're finding ourselves in, of course.
Thank you for that. And then one follow-up question. In your introduction, Ms. Moore, you mentioned that some additional restriction measures came in kind of partway through the survey, and you thought that maybe there was some variability in the responses kind of pre and post. Did you actually pick up anything in the survey responses in terms of variability in those differences, or is it just something to be aware of in terms of the timing of the survey?
It's through the chair. It's really just to be aware of through the timing. I think that we didn't pull the survey responses halfway through, so we are only looking at them at the tail end. So we're looking at them as a whole. But it's I just wanted to flag that as a timing consideration for council. You know, especially around the questions like, should we be doing more public engagement, or should we be, you know, opening up more recreation programs? Questions like that may have been answered differently by the people who responded in the later part of the week, the time that the survey was open versus the first half. But I don't have any direct data to support that. It's just a consideration that we should keep in mind.
Thank you for that.
Any other questions or comments? Yep, go ahead, Councilor Race.
Thank you. Good morning, Christine. How are you?
Good morning. I'm good, thanks. How are you?
So I'm looking at the slide, what residents want to hear more about. And council process, rationale, and decision-making, allocation of taxes, the first one, and the second one, community planning, development, and density. And so I sort of anecdotally tend to hear a lot in the community, or some in the community, about, you know, the growth and the pace of growth and things like that. And was there anything more that kind of came out of those 2 bullet points that might flesh it out a little bit?
Through the chair, yes, absolutely. I think that you know, what I saw in the comments, and certainly what you'll see when you review all of the raw data, the comments. The first one was really interesting in the sense that it was encouraging to see that there is an interest in more understanding of council's processes. We saw some comments about, you know, wanting to know more about decisions that are being made in advance of the council meeting where they're being made. And more information on, you know, when decisions are made, how do we better reflect what those decisions are and why they were made, and outlining some of the rationale for those decisions, and making them, you know, packaging them in a way that it is manageable for the community to review, rather than big long reports and big long you know, our general minutes of meetings type things. So I think that's a good takeaway for us to look at and come up with ways that we can, and decisions that we can try to reflect and better follow up and bring circle, you know, kind of close the loop on the decision making that's happening at the council table. On the second point, the community planning, development, and density, that was really about the concern around density and development and the pace. And so the comments were reflective of learning more about the how projects go through the approval process and the application process, and just understanding more again around the rationale for some of the decisions that are being made and the policies that are behind those decisions.
If I might follow up, it strikes me listening to that and other comments that I've heard. The mayor had an idea that I think came from another municipality about something on our website that explained different things and was sort of a fact checker for things that kind of float through the community that may not be correct. And this is the real thing that's going on. And so it's probably a larger discussion, and this is more of a comment than a question, is we might consider going forward to have some kind of a bulletin board on our website to explain things in simpler language as they are going through a process, a development, for example, or some other key municipal issue, as it's going through the decision process, to explain what it is and where our limits are as a local government and so forth. It seems to kind of cry out for that kind of an explanation, just a little bit more flesh than what we actually get in our regular staff reports. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Race. One of the other things that we're thinking about also is getting short videos up after the agenda comes out to sort of talk to the community about what is on the Tuesday agenda and things where community input is open and enabled, and also some of the tougher decisions council is facing. So that's another way to sort of be more transparent about what's on the agenda, where the community can have input, when decisions are getting made. So we are going to take a look at trying to ease that burden for the community to try and figure that out. Councillor Stoner.
Thank you. And I don't want to go totally down the rabbit hole of improving on communications on council process, but one thing that I have noticed recently is that we've actually entirely stopped doing council briefs. So following our Tuesday meetings, when decisions have been made, because we've moved them to special business meetings. I think they were only originally done for regular business meetings. And I wonder if that's something that is perhaps a low effort but high value to bring back, just in terms of a summary of the decisions that were made on a Tuesday meeting.
Through you, Chair. Yes, that is true. We have dropped those since the regular meeting ceased. I think that there is an opportunity there. I think we would like to even take that one step further and try to move it into something that is more plain language rather than just the sort of snippets and cut and pastes from the minutes. So it is something that we'd like to move forward with or get back on track. I think that there's some really great feedback in this survey that can help us in this process. It's always a question of how to get it done, but we're working on that part of it.
Thank you, Ms. Moore. Any other thoughts or questions? Councillor Pettengill.
Well, just reading the first bullet, council process, rationale, and decision-making, and allocation of taxes. I know we have talked previously about the idea that once we debate resolutions and motions vigorously, but once the debate is done, we move forward together as a council. And so I always find myself a little bit, I think, hesitant to get into, I guess there's a fine line between why I made the decision I did and then sort of trying to re-debate something that council has decided on. And so I guess for me personally, a takeaway is to think a little bit more about how I can shed some light on how I'm coming to my decisions or my thought process without, while still trying to stay away from that idea of trying to re-debate something that council has already decided.
Go ahead, Ms. Moore.
Through the chair, one of the things that I've been looking at, and I would love to hear any best practices that council has come across through your work, is the idea of creating, and this is the wrong word, but a decision paper or a white paper or something that sounds extremely bureaucratic, but something that could be more visual, be easy to digest, but that we create a format for sharing some of the rationale around some of the bigger decisions that are being made, and the decisions that we know that are really important to the community and have a high degree of polarization or varied viewpoints. It's not possible to do it for all decisions. The pace of decision making in Squamish is incredibly high, but there are certainly some that could benefit from this, and I think what we're hearing through this survey is that the public really wants to hear it. And it kind of builds upon what Councillor Race mentioned earlier about the fact checking or they're fact correcting, but I'd love to see us create a template that that we can use and that the public know that they can find that rationale and that follow up. So if you have come across any best practices that you've seen in other municipalities or other levels of government, I'd love to get those from you, and we'll put our own Squamish version together.
Thank you, Ms. Moore. Do we know what a statistically representative sample of our community is? Like how many surveys we would need to receive in order to say that's a statistically valid result? Like, is it 1,000 surveys? Is it 500? Do we have a sense?
That's a great question. We have worked with a consultant in the past who has kind of pitched their services on a survey response, a survey, more of a statistically accurate survey panel. It's something that we've looked at. We don't have that data or that expertise on staff in terms of the pulling the doing a statistically relevant survey to understand what that sample size would need to be. But it's something that we have looked at, and it is possible. It's a commitment to a certain type of public engagement that would allow us to run to have more rigor around our surveys. The surveys that we have really implemented to date across the district and across our departments have been more sort of touch points and have not had that same rigor in terms of the sample size.
Yeah, I know that council has requested a diversity, equity, and inclusion project, which would also look at our engagement efforts in the 2021 budget year. And it would be interesting, you know, we didn't hear a lot from youth. And I also wonder about, you know, the folks we did hear from and what income levels are behind those rankings. So transit surprisingly ranked quite low, but if you ask youth or people who are not in a place where they have a car, then where would transit be on this list? And so I'm always wondering about who we're not hearing from. And we know from studies in other cities that people that have the means and are generally the ones that participate more in community engagement. And those voices that we actually need to hear from often are not. And so I think using the next year as a way to really think about who are we reaching and how best to reach them. It's interesting to see that there's no one information source, right? Like nothing was ranked over 19% in terms of where I get my information. The part of me is a little bit sad that Facebook was the most popular, but I think that also speaks to a certain age demographic, because if you ask youth, that's not where they're getting their information. And so where are we missing them? That sort of thing. So I think there's lots of questions we need to keep asking ourselves as we do these surveys. I think it was really important to ask the question about where we should focus our provincial advocacy, because I think that was a bit of education for our community, and also really interesting to see what they prioritized in terms of all the work we need to do on the advocacy front. So I hope we keep asking that. And I was totally surprised by the disparity in, yes, we should be advocating for rapid testing, and no, please don't tell people to come here. That was an interesting conundrum to sort of wrap our heads around. So people aren't quite ready to see visitors being encouraged to come here. And at the same time, I suppose my inference that I'm making is if there was a safe way to screen them, then I would be supportive of that, I think. So clearly we're not at a point where people want to see us encouraging tourism, and yet at the same time, in speaking to many of our small businesses, they really rely on some of that traffic to get through the shoulder season and certainly have a good summer season. So it will be a delicate dance, I think, over the coming months to walk that line with our community as we relearn with each new public health order. Councillor Race.
Thank you. I'm not an expert on surveys, but it strikes me that there are two significant different types. And one is where, like here, it's a voluntary response on a particular issue or series of issues. And the other is where you're randomly contacted by the survey company throughout the community. And I can tell you an experience with Statistics Canada, who randomly contacted me some years ago before I was on council. Once they randomly contact you, they don't like to let you go because somehow you've come up in their database. And if they just dealt with the people that voluntarily answered questions, they wouldn't necessarily get the true picture of it. And when I refused to answer, they actually threatened to charge me. So I had to go through this whole survey process, which was actually quite extensive with them. But that's the kind of survey that gets the sort of the true random sample. And obviously, the larger the number, the better. But you have to have some system to randomly contact people and get their response on a particular issue, rather than when it's a voluntary response, you're going to get people who are interested in particular issues who will, and sometimes that will skew the results of the survey. So I'll leave it at that. So we'd have to be prepared to do the other type of survey, I think, if we wanted statistical accuracy.
Ms. Moore?
Through the chair, absolutely. And I think what we are seeing, further to Councillor Race's comments, is that, so many people are choosing not to answer those cold calls. If they don't recognize numbers on their cell phones, they just don't answer. So really that truly random survey is very challenging to run these days, and especially probably for the budgets that we would be able to put towards it. But I will just say the survey research panel that I just briefly mentioned earlier, it's a bit of a hybrid approach. So what it would do is it would invite community members, over the course of time. It would be something that would constantly invite community members to join. You would join the research panel voluntarily, and then what we could do is you would identify sort of where you were missing demographics. So maybe you were missing demographics from the seniors. So we would work more to get more seniors into the research panel. And then when a survey does go out, then you create a random sample from your survey research panel. So there's a bit more buy-in from the community. They know and expect to hear from the district. There are some downsides. I mean, certainly cost is an issue with running something like this on a year-round basis. But as well, there is potential for fatigue when it comes to going to the same people over and over again. So there are pros and cons. It's certainly something we can look into more deeply in the future and over the coming year.
Thank you. Councillor Herford?
Thank you. There's been much talk of the statistical relevance, I guess, of this engagement, but I did find it interesting and sort of reassuring that some things that a portion of our community ranked the highest to spend more on also ranked the highest to spend less on with other portions of our community. So I think that really does sum up the conundrum that we have as a municipality as we present these budgets. So I think it does sort of hit the mark for me, because it does represent, it sort of captures the complexity of the decisions that we're faced with. So I just wanted to make sure I highlighted that piece.
Thank you. All right, anything else? Thank you, Ms. Moore. We'll look forward to receiving the link to the raw data. And then I just wanted to go back to Mr. Russell to just review with council the schedule for the rest and the community, the rest of the budget process, now that we're getting closer to December.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm about to. I believe that I need the host to shift me the ball so I can share my screen.
There you go.
Okay. And I believe that the screen I am sharing shows a financial plan schedule highlight. Is that correct?
Oh, it's your vacation pictures from last summer. No, I'm just joking. It is the schedule.
Sorry, Mayor, but I only have one screen. So when you say that, it could be true. So, except that I'm thinking I didn't go anywhere last summer because of COVID. So I don't know what pictures I would have. Okay. So I would thank you very much. You caught me off guard there. Good. In October, we did the utility fund operating and capital. In November already, because we're not finished with November quite yet. We did the non-discretionary operating. That was last week. In December, we're going to do the utility fee bylaws. We're going to do the general fund service level change, and we'll provide a summary at that point. We plan to do the general fund capital projects and special operating projects, and to bring forward staff's response to the BC COVID Restart Grant for local municipalities and local governments, I should say. We hope to wrap all of that up and in February hold our public meeting, although to follow on Ms. Moore's comments around budget engagement, et cetera, we're not quite sure what the public meeting is going to look like because it could be public or it could be virtually public. Nonetheless, the goal will be to get us to a point in February where we can review the financial plan bylaw, and then finally in April to outline the property tax review and get that bylaw passed. So I think what I wanted to highlight here is that we've had some minor changes. We've did a bit of shuffling around with the order, and we're going to bring forward, we're going to delay slightly the capital projects and special operating projects, which were to come in November, and that is to allow us to incorporate the BC COVID Restart Grant and how it may apply to those projects, and then to try to bring the full summary in December and wrap it up so we can go to public meetings in January. Now, that is those are all the comments I have with respect to the financial plan schedule and the highlights. And I would like to thank council for their I'd like to thank council for allowing us to take this extra bit of time to provide you with this information. And with that, I am going to stop sharing my screen because that's all I need to say right now. Thank you.
Council, any questions for Mr. Russell on timing? Councilor French.
Thank you. I'd just like to get a little more insight into that public meeting and timing around when there will be some clarity. Is that something we can expect to have an update on in December when we're revisiting budget talk?
Councilor French, I think that we will probably be coming up with a plan in January for the public engagement piece of this, and then we will be having to be nimble and flexible depending on where we're at with our COVID numbers and the public orders that are in place. So right now, we would not be allowed to host any in-person engagement on this. Our hope is that we would be able to, in some capacity, do that. And so if it needs to be entirely online, then we need to think about what that looks like and how is it engaging, and how is it not just a one-way report out to our community, but also an opportunity for them to participate. So we'll probably leave that for thinking and confirmation in January.
Very good, thank you.
Thanks for the question. Anything else? All right. I'd like to report that I'm ahead of schedule.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Russell. And so we have committee of the whole scheduled to start at, I think it's 11:15.
Yeah.
So I'll have a motion to terminate, is that right? Councilor Herford? Yes. Seconded by Councilor Stoner. Sorry, he's in the room. And we'll see everyone at 11:15. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.